child's class photo from 20 years ago, remove them from school immediately. This morning at 6:47 a.m., a compass spun wildly when pointed at Roosevelt Elementary's main entrance. The metal detector's display flickered between numbers that don't exist. Radio chatter from the school district office keeps cutting to a child's voice reciting attendance from 1987. Here's what we know as of November 15th, 2024, 7:30 a.m. If you ignore this warning, your child may stop aging on their next birthday. I need you to remember this phrase exactly. He sits in the back row, second seat from the left. 3 incidents in the past 18 hours. A parent in Millbrook found her son's class roster from 1995. Same boy, same desk assignment, same careful handwriting. A janitor at Central High swept the same hallway 3 times. Each pass, one more desk appeared in the storage closet. This morning, a substitute teacher called in sick after finding her own kindergarten photo in a current student's backpack. The lighthouse on Beacon Hill hasn't worked since 1983. Keep that in mind. This message is issued by the Emergency Coordination Center. Please listen closely and follow the instructions. This is not a drill. We are issuing an immediate advisory regarding anomalous enrollment patterns at educational facilities district-wide. A single individual has been documented attending classes continuously since September 1983 without graduating, transferring, or aging. Here's what we know. On November 12th, 2024, Margaret Chen was digitizing old yearbooks for Westfield High's 40th anniversary when she noticed the same face across 4 decades of senior class photos. Same positioning, same slight smile, same name in the roster, David Marsh. The school has no record of a David Marsh ever enrolling, yet there he sits in every group photo since 1983, always in the back row, second seat from the left. Initial response followed standard protocols. The school district contacted local police who ran background checks and missing persons searches. No David Marsh matching the description exists in any database. Animal control was called when several teachers reported an unusual smell, like wet leaves and old chalk, lingering in classrooms where David had been spotted. Standard cleaning procedures failed to eliminate the odor. Here are the documented incidents, starting with the least severe. A guidance counselor at Pine Valley Elementary, Sarah Rodriguez, was reviewing student files last Tuesday when she found 41 years of identical report cards for David Marsh. Same handwriting, same grades. Always B plus average, perfect attendance, no disciplinary actions. The paper yellowed with age, but the ink stayed fresh. Sarah called the number listed for David's emergency contact. The voice that answered spoke in a child's cadence but used language patterns from the 1980s, mentioning a snow day that happened in February 1987. When Sarah asked to speak to a parent, the voice simply repeated, "He sits in the back row, second seat from the left," and the line went dead. Sarah checked the student database. David Marsh showed as currently enrolled in 3rd grade, 4th grade, 8th grade, and senior year simultaneously across 4 different schools in the district. Each entry listed the same birthday, October 31st, but spanning birth years from 1965 to 2017. The system wouldn't allow her to delete any of the records. When she tried, new entries appeared. At Jefferson Middle School, history teacher Bob Martinez began noticing that one student always knew the answers to questions about events from the 1980s and 90s with unusual specificity. Not textbook knowledge, personal observations. During a lesson about the Challenger disaster, David raised his hand and described watching it happen in Mrs. Patterson's class. Margaret Patterson had taught at Jefferson from 1985 to 1992, retiring years before David's supposed enrollment. Bob checked the old class rosters in the basement archives. David Marsh appeared in Margaret's 1986 attendance logs, then again in similar handwriting across multiple teachers' records through the decades. The unsettling detail, Each entry noted, "Excellent student, very quiet, sits in preferred spot." Bob found Margaret's retirement address and called her. Margaret remembered David clearly. "Sweet boy," she said. "Never missed a day, never caused trouble. Strange thing, though. He looked exactly the same in June as he did in September. I figured he was just one of those kids who didn't grow much that year." She paused. "Come to think of it, he looked the same as the David in my first grade class photos from 1973. I was a student teacher then." Bob asked if she had the contact information for David's family. Margaret went quiet for a long moment. "You know, I don't think I ever met his parents. They never came to conferences, never returned calls, but his emergency contact was always listed as educational services. No address, just a phone number that played classical music when you called." The first serious incident occurred Thursday at Roosevelt Elementary. Third grade teacher Lisa Wong was setting up her classroom early when she heard a voice from the supply closet reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. She opened the door and found a boy arranging construction paper with mechanical precision, every sheet exactly 2 inches from the next, colors organized in a sequence that hurt to look at directly. Lisa recognized him from her roster, David Marsh. She asked why he was in the building so early. David looked up with eyes that reflected light like a night animal's and said, "I'm always early for the first day of school." Lisa checked her calendar. It was November 14th, well into the semester. She walked David to the main office, but when she turned to introduce him to the principal, he wasn't there. The construction paper in her supply closet was gone. In its place, she found 41 perfect attendance certificates, each dated for a different school year, all bearing David's name in the same careful script. Lisa called the emergency number from her desk phone. Classical music played for 30 seconds. Then a child's voice recited her full name, her home address, and the names of every student she'd taught in the past 7 years. The voice asked, "Which desk would you prefer for David?" The line disconnected before she could respond. When Lisa arrived at school the next morning, there was an extra desk in her classroom. Second row, second seat from the left. A nameplate read David Marsh in hand-carved letters that looked decades old. The desk was worn smooth by years of use, with initials scratched into the surface dating back to 1984. Here's where things escalated. Friday afternoon, high school senior Jake Morrison decided to confront David directly. Jake had been in classes with David since elementary school. Literally the same David, who never aged, never changed, just moved through the grades like a ghost. Jake cornered him after chemistry class and demanded answers. David smiled and said, "You weren't supposed to notice." His voice carried the slight echo you hear in empty auditoriums. Jake grabbed David's shoulder to keep him from leaving. His hand passed through solid fabric but touched nothing underneath. David continued walking as if Jake didn't exist, but the chemistry equipment behind them began to smoke and hiss. The periodic table poster curled at the edges and the letters rearranged themselves into words no one recognized. Jake found the janitor and tried to explain what happened. The janitor, Carl Preston, who'd worked the district for 30 years, just nodded grimly. "I've been cleaning up after that boy for decades," Carl said. "Erasers turn to dust in his hands. Chalk breaks when he writes. And every school year, I have to replace the carpet in whatever classroom he's in because it develops stains that look like footprints, but they go deeper than the fibers. They go all the way down to the subfloor." Jake demanded to know why nobody had reported this. Carl led him to the maintenance office and showed him a filing cabinet filled with incident reports dating back to 1983. Every report described the same phenomena: unexplained odors, equipment malfunctions, and a student who appeared in photographs but cast no reflection in classroom windows. "We tried reporting it," Carl said. "Superintendents, school board meetings, even called the state education department. Nobody returns our calls about David Marsh. When we mention the name, people just say they'll look into it and hang up." He pulled out a folder thick with documented complaints. Last year, 3 teachers tried to have him removed from their classes. All 3 put in for transfers to other districts by Christmas. They won't say why. The most severe incident happened Saturday night. Principal Helen Torres received a call at home from the school's security system. Motion detected in multiple classrooms, but the cameras showed nothing. She drove to Roosevelt Elementary and found every light in the building on, though the main electrical panel showed all circuits off. Helen walked through the hallways calling out, her voice echoing strangely, each word returning as if spoken by a child. In the 3rd grade wing, she found 23 desks arranged in a perfect spiral, each one carved with the name David Marsh, and a different year from 1983 to 2024. The desks looked like they'd been weathered by decades of use, surfaces smooth as river stones. She called the police from her cell phone, but the number connected to the school's main office. A child's voice answered, "Roosevelt Elementary, this is David. How may I help you?" Helen hung up and tried again. Same voice, same greeting. On the 3rd attempt, the voice said, "Mrs. Torres, you should go home now. It's past bedtime and tomorrow is a school day." Helen found her car keys in her hand, though she didn't remember pulling them from her purse. She walked to her vehicle, started the engine, and drove home. She has no memory of leaving the building or locking up. The next morning, the desks were back in their proper classrooms, but each one had David Marsh carved faintly into the surface. Security footage from that night shows Helen's car in the parking lot from 11:47 p.m. to 3:22 a.m., but the cameras inside the building recorded nothing except empty hallways and the sound of chalk writing on blackboards. A parent tried to intervene Sunday morning. Frank Delacroix had been hearing stories from his daughter Emma about the old student, who knew things no kid should know. Emma, a bright 4th grader, told her father that David had described the cafeteria before the 1994 renovation, mentioned teachers who retired before Emma was born, and once showed her a library book that was supposedly lost in 1989. Frank decided to wait for David after school. He positioned himself by the main entrance with a digital camera, planning to document David's face and confront whoever was responsible for this elaborate prank. At 3:15 p.m., students began filing out. Frank photographed everyone, including several children who matched David's general description. When Frank reviewed the photos that evening, every image showed empty space where David should have been, not blurred or obscured, completely absent, as if the camera couldn't register his presence. But in the background of several shots, Frank noticed something disturbing. The school building appeared different in each photo, sometimes with an extra wing, sometimes with windows in different arrangements, once with a bell tower that Roosevelt Elementary never had. Frank printed the photos and compared them to archived images of the school. Every anomaly matched the building's appearance from different time periods over the past 40 years. It was as if David's presence somehow unstuck the building from its current timeline. Frank called his daughter to ask about David's behavior. Emma said, "Daddy, David tells us stories about the old days, but they don't sound like stories. He talks about the food poisoning in 1991 like he was there throwing up with everyone else. He knows which water fountains used to work and which classrooms used to be supply closets." She paused. "And sometimes when he talks about the past, the classroom changes a little. The bulletin boards show older decorations, or there's a different smell, like the cleaning supplies they used to use. We've identified 4 distinct stages of David's manifestation, based on 41 years of documented incidents. Stage 1, integration. David appears on class rosters and in student photographs. Teachers note his quiet demeanor and perfect attendance, but cannot recall specific interactions. This stage typically lasts 1 to 3 weeks. Signs include outdated references in his work, knowledge of school history predating his enrollment, and technology malfunctioning in his presence. Stage 2, recognition. David begins acknowledging other students and staff, but his responses suggest experiences spanning multiple decades. Students report that he knows their older siblings or describes events from years before. The classroom environment begins showing temporal anomalies. Outdated decorations appear briefly, old teaching materials surface, and modern equipment displays dates from previous decades. Stage 3. Temporal bleeding. Past and present overlay visibly. Witnesses report seeing the classroom as it appeared in previous years when David is present. School records become inconsistent, showing multiple enrollment dates for the same student. Adults who try to investigate experience memory gaps and find themselves unable to maintain focus on David-related inconsistencies. Stage 4. Anchoring. David becomes a fixed point in the school's timeline. Attempts to remove him from classes fail. He simply appears elsewhere in the building. The institution's records restructure themselves around his presence. Staff members begin accepting David as a permanent fixture, unable to remember their concerns about him. Most schools in our district have reached Stage 3. Roosevelt Elementary entered Stage 4 last Thursday. Here's what you need to know to protect your children. First, check every class photo your child appears in, going back as far as you have records. If you see the same face across multiple years without aging, remove your child from that school immediately. Do not wait for the semester to end. Do not give notice to the administration. Second, ask your child about classmates who know too much about school history. Children often notice inconsistencies that adults dismiss. If your child mentions a student who talks about events from before their birth year, treats old facilities as if they're current, or seems to have personal knowledge of retired teachers, document everything they tell you. Third, if you encounter David directly, do not try to photograph him, touch him, or demand explanations. Adults who have confronted him directly report memory gaps, persistent nightmares about endless school hallways, and an inability to discuss the encounter for weeks afterward. One parent found her house keys in her child's desk at school with no memory of how they got there. Fourth, monitor your child for signs of temporal displacement. These include knowledge of events that happened before their birth, ability to navigate the school using outdated floor plans, or references to the way things used to be, regarding facilities they've never seen in that configuration. Fifth, if your child stops aging on their birthday, evacuate immediately and contact the emergency services. Do not attempt to celebrate the birthday. Do not allow your child to return to school. 3 families have reported this phenomenon. All 3 children were later found attending classes they'd never enrolled in, sitting in the back row, second seat from the left. Here's the problem we're facing. The school district's administration has no memory of David Marsh, despite 41 years of documentation. When presented with evidence, officials acknowledge the information but cannot retain it. Meetings about David are scheduled and then forgotten. Emails about his enrollment are sent but never received. State education officials have stopped returning calls about anomalous student records. The Department of Health won't investigate reports of unusual odors or temporal distortions in school buildings. Federal authorities defer to local school boards who have no retained knowledge of the issues. This morning, we received reports that David has appeared in schools across 3 neighboring counties. Always the same positioning, same age, same quiet demeanor. Each school's records show him as continuously enrolled since their opening dates, regardless of when they were built. Let me be clear about what we're dealing with. This is not a prank, not administrative error, and not mass hysteria. David Marsh represents a fundamental breach in the normal flow of educational institutions. He exists as a permanent student, immune to graduation, aging, or removal, anchored to the concept of perpetual enrollment. The lighthouse on Beacon Hill began working again this morning for the first time since 1983. Its beam sweeps across the school district every 7 minutes, and during each pass, witnesses report seeing additional windows in school buildings. Windows that show classrooms from decades past, with David Marsh visible in each one, sitting in the back row, second seat from the left. If you you don't remember arriving at the school to pick up your child, leave immediately. The temporal distortions around David can trap parents in educational loops where every day becomes the first day of school and every year repeats kindergarten through 12th grade. 2 families have been stuck in parent-teacher conferences since 1987, aging normally but unable to recognize that the meeting never ends. We'll maintain this broadcast frequency, but transmission may become irregular as David's influence spreads. Educational institutions appear to exist outside normal time in his presence. Radio equipment in affected schools receives signals from decades past, and our technicians report that their instruments show this message being broadcast in 1983, 1995, 2007, and today simultaneously. He sits in the back row, second seat from the left. If you see him there, remember that he's been waiting for 41 years for someone to notice. Now that you have, he knows where your children go to school. Class is always in session.